in my center screen? No, I can't tell. How does this work?
I have you centered on my screen, and I can
Okay, can you all
spotlight
hear
you.
me? Everyone can hear me now? Okay, great. So first of all, Ari, thank you for that introduction. It's I had a lot of fun with those of you that adventured with me through Jerusalem, and I really look forward to this other kind of adventure, which is at first feels, I guess, more academic, but hopefully will be experiential as well, both in our minds and who knows what will happen in the future. But the I guess I would say the reason, or the raison d'être for this actual lecture, the way it came to be, the title, Understanding Arab Culture and Understanding Ourselves, was in a way a result of my own research. When I first came to Israel, I was already fluent in Arabic and was quite interested in Islamic studies. And I ended up spending a lot of time with different Arab communities, and we'll get into those types of communities a bit later on as this lecture series progresses. But I noticed that the more time I spent with these communities, especially with the Islamic communities, because in Israel we have Druze, we have Bedouin, we have Muslims, we have Circassians, we have Christian Arabs of many different types of denominations. And I picked up on the fact that when I spent a lot of time with the Muslim families, and I lived with them for months, that it felt very similar to the point to my own Jewish upbringing, which was religious, Orthodox. And I was kind of shocked at the fact that eventually it wasn't similar, it was the same thing. It was the same humor, the same rationale, the same turning to the various types of hadith, of Talmudic and our type of Talmud, and other types of commentaries for elucidation. And so then when I became the director of Kivunim, this Jewish gap year program that essentially studies Jewish communities throughout the world, this program focuses on teaching Arabic and Islam in addition to Hebrew, and of course focusing on Israel and Zionism. And I became even more, as the years went by, one day I realized that I was actually, through explaining the Islamic world and the Arab world, and having the background in classics that I have, I suddenly realized that I was actually explaining ourselves and understanding what it meant to be, by ourselves I mean as a Jew, speaking as a Jew. And this was an incredible revelation. And meeting Clinton Bailey, who is the world expert on the Bedouin, and who wrote a book that he will be sharing with you in a lecture to come, called I have it right here, basically the Bedouin and the Bible, and how their habits and customs that we have as Jews basically come from the Bedouin themselves. So it's basically, I'm very happy to use this chance with all of you to share this. Paradoxically, my very first lecture is not going to be about that. It's going to be about the Greek world. And because we have to actually explore what we think our own background is, our own connections to Hellenism, before we move on to our Islamic Arabic connections. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and begin. One second here. So I started with this screen because we're beginning, instead of the Arab world, we are beginning in Greece. And every class and every lecture that I will have with you, I'm going to teach you a phrase, an idiom, an expression. And I'm going to expect you to memorize it for your next lecture, for the next time I speak with you. Today, for the first and only time, I will teach you something that is not Arabic. It's Greek. And what I'm showing you right here is the Temple of Delphi. And from time, I guess even prehistoric times, pilgrims would come from all over the world to consult the Oracle of Delphi, to receive answers to questions that perturbed them. This is an actual, a more modern depiction of the Oracle. And this is on a Greek vase, an actual Greek Hylex for drinking wine. And people would come from all over to consult with the Oracle of Delphi and ask them questions, political questions, personal questions. And whenever they would arrive at the Oracle, at the Temple of Apollo, and they would come from all over, from Turkey, from modern day Turkey, from I guess you'd say the Levant, you name it. They crossed the sea, they crossed the mountains, and on top of the temple was a sign that said Gnothi Seauton, and that is your expression for the day. Most of you know it. Gnothi Seauton means know yourself. Now, why would somebody coming with a very pertinent question have a warning before they ask the question to know yourself? And the answer is, it's actually never really given, but it's given through historical stories, through Herodotus, actually our very first known historian of antiquity. He tells a story that he claims is historical, that King Croesus of Lydia was fighting the Persians, and he wanted to know if you would amass a great army and attack them, if you would actually defeat them and become the new ruler of this great empire. And so he sends a messenger to the Oracle of Delphi, and the messenger arrives. He's admitted. He sees the sign. He passes under the sign. He goes to the temple. He consults the oracle, and the answer of the oracle is, "When you fight the Persians, the great empire will fall." So he goes to war, gathers his people very encouraged, and he's defeated, humiliated, taken in chains to King Darius of the Persians. And of course, the moral of the story is he didn't ask another important follow-up question. Which empire will fall? Which great empire will fall? And this is the question of knowing yourself. He didn't question his own hubris, his own arrogance, his own assumptions. And Herodotus tells another story. And by the way, the stories of the Oracle of Delphi go on, and they're told in many, many different cultures of the world. But his second follow-up story, which does have historical precedence and is known to be actually true, is that when the Athenians are getting defeated quite badly by the Persians a few hundred years later, they again send an emissary to the Oracle of Delphi, and they say, we're losing to the Persians. What should we do? And the oracle's answer is, you might as well build a wall of wood as expect to defeat the Persians. And this fills the messenger with great dismay. They bring it back to the Athenian assembly. The Athenians are also devastated, until Themistocles, the general, says, no, a wall of wood means let's build ships. And they build a navy, and they defeat the Persians at Salamis. And of course, most of us know the rest of the history. The Greeks defeat the Persians, and supposedly the light of the West lived to create the philosophy that guides us until today. That's at least the stories we tell ourselves. So that's a bit about Gnothi Seauton. And here we are knowing ourselves together in East Jerusalem. And if you notice the picture, I deliberately included it. It's people, some of you might recognize, people from Ari Katz's adventure expedition to Israel with a very different take on things. We visited East Jerusalem together and met Palestinians, wandered the neighborhoods. And I like this picture because it showed me what I'm trying to get across for you in the next few lectures, which is that we have arrived where we are. We are sitting here having this conversation right now. We're as a result of this crazy history that happened to us. And this woman to the left on her phone, pulling her cart, is part of that same history. And I want us to understand that. And that is why I call this lecture the Hellenistic yo-yo. It's not just for Hellenism. It's a yo-yo in the sense that what we consider to be our history and our past is so intertwined, and it keeps going. It has its ups and downs, and we never know really what is up and what is down. This actual depiction, the Greeks, by the way, invented the yo-yo as far as we know, just like they invented history and philosophy and other incredibly important, relevant fields, but the yo-yo is the most important. And and here we are again by the Damascus Gate. And we're starting now. This fellow here is Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. And Philip II was a Macedonian. He was not even properly Greek. And because of this, the other Greeks, the Athenians, the Spartans, the Corinthians, made a lot of fun of him and the other Macedonians for having a funny accent, for having a different culture, for not behaving properly Greek. And he had a chip on his shoulder about it, a big chip on his shoulder. So one of the things he did is he developed an incredible army that not only started to conquer the rest of Greece, but also started to conquer other parts of the known world. Persia. He started cutting huge swaths into different areas until he suddenly died. But before he died, one of the things he did, by the way, this is an actual depiction of Philip II when he was alive from his tomb in Vergina, which I encourage you to go to one day. Before he died, he hired the greatest Greek thinker, but basically one of the greatest Greek thinkers ever known, by the name of Aristotle, to tutor his own son. In other words, what he was saying, I am Macedonian, you think I'm not Greek enough for you. I'm going to take the greatest of all your Greek thinkers, who comprises everything that you think is important about philosophy, about poetry, about politics, about science, and he's going to teach it to my son. And his son Alexander the Great, when Philip II died, continued his father's tradition, both in the sense of conquering, but also in the sense of, I guess, in my mind, taking this Greek culture, which included, as I said, politics, philosophy, theater, science. Basically, the list goes on and on. The yo-yo, but taking this incredible way, this incredible creation that was only for the Greeks. The Greeks did not want to share with anybody. It took somebody that felt outside of the Greek world to actually carry this kind of thought, this kind of ambition with him. And with his conquering, he also brought with him this incredible this type of knowledge, this type of wisdom. And people, the different civilizations, some of them were conquered more willingly than others, started to imbibe this way of thinking, this Hellenism, this idea of questioning. Here is, and one of the most important creations that we never ever give proper attention to, that he passed on, is the idea of writing, of passing on and imparting knowledge. And this is one of the key points that's going to be the kernel of our series on Islamic and Arab thought throughout the series. This idea of transmission of knowledge. Why is it so important, and how is it done, and how did we ever come to the idea that our knowledge should be stored, should be saved, should be shared, should be prized? We just finished Hanukkah, and I'm going to get into this in a few moments, a festival that basically celebrates our fight against this type of assimilation and our victory over it. And what were we fighting against, and what is assimilation? And we're going to get into this today as well. This, of course, is the library, a depiction of the Library of Alexandria, where Alexander the Great created a city, many Alexandrias, but this is the one in Egypt, in which all of these types of knowledge were accrued and saved. It was so important for them to have every single known book on every type of field in the world that any ship that docked in Alexandria was searched for books, for any type of scrolls, any type of knowledge-based material, and they were not allowed to leave the docks until that scroll, if the Library of Alexandria did not have a copy, it was given to a scribe to copy, and then only then was the ship allowed to leave again. So I just wanted to show you a modern library, which most of us don't know anymore, how that looks like. How did you catalog such a thing? And so I wrote here, along with constantly conquering and expanding his empire, Alexander caused the spread of Hellenism and its influence, which included this. And I want to give you I want to diverge briefly to explain to you about Greek vases. The Greeks were incredibly proud of what they did, of what they accomplished. They were very aware of it. And as I said, it was by the Greeks, for the Greeks, not meant to be shared. But on the back of this vase is a very early depiction of the alphabet. Now we're talking about the transmission of knowledge. How did it ever come to be that knowledge was able to be written down in a medium, in a way that could be read by the masses and understood, absorbed, and allowing people with potential geniuses. I want you to realize that even in time of cave people, you still had your potential Hawking, your potential Einstein, your potential Marie Curie. All these great geniuses existed without the ability to realize their genius. When you spread knowledge and you spread science and you spread ideas, the abilities that are inherent in many of these incredible people among us have a chance to grow and develop. So how did the alphabet happen? And this is the other part of the thing. We give the Greeks the credit for it, but in fact, here's our yo-yo again. In fact, it came through the Phoenicians. And I'm gonna do this constantly, so I want you to get used to my style. I'll be taking you down one path, and I'm going to suddenly swing and talk about something else totally different. The Phoenicians were the people who lived, I guess, in modern-day Lebanon now, and they were famous traders. They traded, as you know, if you look on the top right, they traded cedar, and of course, King Solomon imported this cedar. Another thing they were experts in was a type of dye that was made out of the murex shell, and this dye went from a deep blue to a deep purple. And it's also known, if you know the Jewish word, it's also known as techelet, that deep kind of indigo blue that's used for tzitzit. It's also the blue that's on our flag of Israel, because the flag of Israel is meant to copy a talit. So the Phoenicians were experts in producing this dye, and they imported it all over the world, and the Greeks loved it. The Greeks loved it so much that the word Phoenician means the purples, because they're the people that brought them this purple dye. And along with this purple dye, they also brought something else that that was found interesting. I wrote, wait a minute, how do we get to this? How do we get from this library, from this? And here's the network of the Phoenicians, how they traveled. And they arrived in Greece, and the Greeks noticed that they have this weird thing. They're writing, a writing system. And this writing system of ancient Phoenician is the exact same as this writing system of ancient Hebrew. There's no difference at all. It's the same writing system exactly. So the Greeks found this kind of fascinating. And the point I was making with this earlier slide is that for other nations, for the Mesopotamians who wrote in cuneiform, the Sumerians who actually invented writing, for the Egyptians who just a couple of hundred years later came up with their own system of writing, it took decades to master the writing system. There were hundreds and hundreds of symbols. And some guy in the Sinai decided these hieroglyphics were way too complicated and started coming up with a different system. And what they did, I'm going to pick a couple of symbols to show you. Let's say they'd want to say, let's find the word for a house. Let me see. The ba. Is it here? It's up here. 1 second. Here. Look at the symbol for B. Let's say it's a box. And they wanted to say the word for bag, let's say, for the hell of it. And they took a symbol for the house, bait, and they took the symbol for gimel, which is a camel hump, and put the two together and just said bug. And that was one of the greatest innovations in human history. By that simple step, suddenly they were able to put all of these sounds together that made sense. The obvious thing they were missing, in case you're listening carefully, was the vowels. That didn't really matter. Any of you people here who love to read, take any page of any book and eliminate all the vowels, and you'll be able to read in English the whole page, and your logic and your sense and your own abilities, logical abilities, will be able to carry you through without much difficulty. So it was an incredible innovation that was available to everybody. So the Lebanese used the system, and when they traded with the Greeks loved it, and they said, "Oh, we want to do it too." So what they did is they took the system and they said, "What do you call it?" And they said, "We call it Aleph." Aleph is A. If you look at the A upside down, it's shaped like an ox, and we call it Aleph Bet, and Bet is the house. Basically, they call it ox house. And the Greeks said, "Oh, that's cool." They incorporated it. They incorporated it in such a way that when we say alpha, beta, gamma, delta, we're speaking Hebrew. We're saying aleph, ox, bet, house, gamma, gamal, camel, delta, delet, and so on. And it's lasted until today. When we say the letter, and even the letters follow the same system. When you say lamed mem, you say LM. When you say the letter M, what's the word in Hebrew for water? Mine. And when you look at the letter M, it's not a coincidence that it's still a wave. So in other words, these incredible traders, the Phoenicians, brought this whole system of thinking to the Greeks, and the Greeks grabbed it, changed it, and they took sounds that the Phoenicians had that they didn't need, like ayin and ayin and all, and they created a vowel system. So they even improved it. So in other words, this is one of the greatest innovations ever happen. And it took this whole, what I'm trying to get you to think about, it took this whole crazy series of circumstances. It took the insecurities of the Macedonians. It took Philip II's conquering. It took his death, and then Alexander the Great to keep pushing. And then it took the Phoenicians from our area, where I'm based right now, to trade with the Greeks to give them the system of exporting this knowledge. And I always love the fact that it takes trade and economics. I find it very romantic. Trade and economics means that you exchange stories. If you ever wonder why the earliest stories of Mesopotamia about Gilgamesh are very similar to some of the stories about Hercules, or the story of Adonis and Cupid. Adonis is Adonai. Why do we have so many similar words? It's because sailors and traders met each other in different ports and exchanged stories, and these stories were taken, incorporated, and became very much part of other civilizations and other cultures. And again, in the spirit of Gnosis Seauton, which I expect you all to remember next lecture, know yourself. This is one of our ways of knowing ourselves. Here is a system, the Greek writing, just on papyrus, which we still have many, many copies of until today. Here's an ancient relief. You can see the Greek writing on the background of a scribe reading. And just to show you how prevalent reading was, you have a Greek vase. I'll teach you all a trick, by the way. Whenever you see a vase that I'm going to show you, a Greek vase, and it's red, that's called red figure. And you can always date red figure when it's red. You can always say, oh, that's after 500 BCE. In other words, you can date them to about 480. This thing's around 480, and you have a woman reading a scroll, reading a book for pleasure. She's standing by her chest, which represents her dowry that she would have brought with her to a marriage. And she's clearly, as I said, in the whole Greek spirit of things, just doing her thing and reading casually. That's not to be taken lightly. And I just wanted to include the Gutenberg Press, because the moment you have writing and it's accessible to everybody, and again, this is going to become incredibly important in our later lecture series. The moment writing is available to everybody and everyone learns how to read, you escape the power structure of the priests, and I would even dare to say rabbis later on, who impose their interpretations of knowledge over the common people. So I just want you to realize just how much this innocent little Lebanese Phoenician trading with the Greeks, the impact it's had on all of us until today. And I just wanted to add a couple more fun Gutenberg pictures for you to think about. And together with this, why are we talking about the exporting of knowledge, exporting of ideas, the exporting of Hellenism? We call Hellenism, basically when we say Hellenism, what we're really saying is the Greeks were standing there saying, why are we like this? You have Heraclitus saying, why are there fossils? There must have been a flood here once. You have Xenophanes saying that I don't really, isn't it funny that our gods look like people? If the animals had gods, the oxes would have their gods. The oxes would have gods with hooves. And he goes on to become more. The fish would have gods with fins, and he goes on and on to basically they're questioning things, and this idea of questioning was very, very, I guess it was intoxicating. And there's a famous story of Alexander the Great meeting a hermit in Diogenes, and he goes to him and he starts asking him questions to enlighten him even further. The famous story of Alexander the Great that's told by 3 different historians is that he wandered the known world with a copy of the Iliad, a scroll under his pillow. So as he did his conquering, he actually had he had a love of learning, of knowledge, of what was Greek, and also of what was of other cultures as well. So he goes to Diogenes, the famous philosopher, and he comes to him and he says, "You are so wise. Tell me what I can do for you." And Diogenes looks at him and says, "You're standing in the way of my light. Can you please move out of the way?" Alexander finds that so wonderful, and when he leaves, he goes, "If I wasn't Alexander the Great, I would prefer to be Diogenes." That kind of freedom. And that, in other words, the reason I'm telling you this story is that it's an interesting concept in an empire, or when the prize is considered to be, there's an emphasis based on the prize being knowledge, the prize being sharing of new ideas and expansion of and creating of new ideas and sharing them. After Alexander the Great dies, as we know, many of you might know, his generals squabbled over who would succeed. I have Pythagoras holding his famous triangle. And I want to ask you now, because we're coming again into looking into the mirror. In one of my other titles for this series is looking into our own mirror, looking into the dusky mirror. And I want to ask, how did this new way of spreading philosophy, culture, politics, gossip play out? Well, most of you have heard of symposiums or symposia, and they could be wild affairs that, as most of us picture them, people just getting drunk, wasted. But in actual fact, if you've read Plato's Symposium, they were actually also meant to be gatherings where people spoke and talked and exchanged ideas. So you had people, you had famous philosophers like Socrates exchanging ideas with actors, and with a very well-known courtesan, who was the Hetairae, the highly trained courtesans were also brought for these parties for their knowledge, for their wit, and musicians. And so this idea of being a truly free person meant that you engage in these symposia. I want you to look carefully at their positions, by the way. They're lying on their left side, holding their kylixes, their drinking cups, in their hands. Here's another depiction of someone, again, leaning on his pillow, being helped by a slave. The lyre, which was played a musical instrument over his head, the walking stick to his side. I love the details in these vase paintings. And I want to show you that this type of Hellenism that reached the Jews in Israel and Alexandria until today, when we have our Pesach Seder, our Passover Seder, and this is from the 1600s in Ukraine, you have people, again, leaning to their left, leaning on the cushion, the idea of exchanging of ideas. And the very name Afikomen is a Greek word relating to a festival, a Greek festival after the procession, a Greek religious procession would happen. So in other words, we are direct ancestors in many ways of this way of thinking, but not as directly as we think. And I'm going to get into that in a bit. This was from the 1600s in Switzerland. This is a typical Pesach drinking cup. And I want to show you, this is a typical kylix, a Greek drinking cup. And when you next time you go to a museum, by the way, this is called black figure. So I told you red figure means that it's after 500. Black figure means it's older than 500. So whenever you see a figure that's painted in black, you have to say, oh, that must be 520, 530, 540. And here you have a picture, and I chose this on purpose because you have Dionysus sailing over the sea. He's the god of wine. You can see by the vines over him. And there are many dolphins around him, and I want you to have the image both of this people sailing, the concept that Greeks painted even subconsciously, people traveling by sea, getting to new places, bringing the idea of wine and drinking, which also leads to thinking and discourse. And I want you to know, by the way, these drinking cups, these kylixes, were filled with wine. You'd have a symposium. Imagine you couldn't see through you were holding your cup in your hand. And you only would know what the picture was after you finished drinking your wine. And you say, oh, look, I got Dionysus. What do you have? And everyone would share their pictures and show each other what they had at the bottom of their cup. So when you look next time you look in a museum and you see these cups, don't see as highfalutin, educated, cultured stuff. Realize these are people having parties, having a good time, showing it and saying, what do you got after they finished drinking their cup? People enjoyed themselves. And this is part of the process. And along with that enjoyment, of course, incorporated a huge spreading of, as I said, of ideas, local news, matters of politics, wars, everything that mattered basically. And when Alexander dies at 32, I want to show you the picture again because he's leaning on a pillow in a similar way, holding a cup. His companions asked him who he bequeaths his kingdom to, and he answers, "Toi krotistoi," to the strongest one. And of course, you have his generals fighting over who gets to conquer which land. And I'm not going to get into a deep Hellenistic history because our topic is a bit different today. But I did want you to see that his generals, Ptolemy, for instance, goes to Egypt, and he founds the Ptolemaic dynasty, and the Seleucids. Antiochus goes to the area of Syria, and that whole Koine Syria, that whole area of Lebanon, Syria, etc. And he sets up his own empire there. And in Egypt, what happened was, whenever we tell the story of Cleopatra was basically just another Ptolemaic Greek. She spoke fluent ancient Egyptian. She was able to read and write hieroglyphics quite well, but she was fully Greek. But we never realized that. Why am I telling you this? Because in our story of Hanukkah that we just finished, we always talk about the evil Greeks and what they did, our fight with them. We never say that they were actually the Syrians under Antiochus. And in fact, the Jews of Greece, and we spend a lot of time with Kivunim students in Greece, they never say in their Hanukkah prayers that the Greeks did this to us. They say the Syrians did this to us. They draw a very clear distinction. So again, even our own assumption of our own history is not quite correct as Jews. Just be aware the Jews of the world in different places view what happened in a very different light, and sometimes this light is worth investigating. So, one second, I want to go up here. I can't even read my own writing here. 1 second. I said the question is, why and how is this Greek history? I'm talking a lot about Greek, not about Arabs or Muslims, if you noticed, or Islam. And in fact, our next lecture too, which is going to be on Jahiliyyah, the time before Islam, is still not getting into Islam. But the question is, why is this Greek history that's known to most of you? How does it reflect personally onto us? And how did it give rise to this very lecture series we just embarked upon? And I asked what happened as a result of Alexander's expansion, the division of his empire. Well, one of them was that within the area we know as Israel today, it was kind of a semi-autonomous type of existence for many, many years. And for the aristocrats, they became wealthy and Hellenized. And this is, again, an important point I want to make, that the people who were unhappy during the time of the Maccabean revolt were not the aristocrats. They weren't the wealthy. They weren't the high priests. They all lived quite well. But the majority of Judeans were rural farmers. So when we look at, for instance, in modern times, if you look at Iran, for instance, and we have an election, and whether or not it's a free election is another kind of question, but subsequent people have done research and shown that the majority of the so-called uneducated classes, or the farmers, tend to vote religiously, more along the lines of a theocracy. And this has also been the case in Egypt and many other places. And this is an interesting lesson for us to learn as well, that or perhaps even for ourselves to look into our own mirror, that oftentimes that what we assume to be the best way, or in our words, the liberal way, the open-minded way, doesn't necessarily reflect the majority, and we don't pay attention to what's happening to many of these people. And what happened here was a deep discontent. But I wanted to go more about the Hellenizing a little bit. The Jews learned Greek, and they began to choose Greek names. So Yoshua becomes Jason, Matthew becomes Menelaus, and the city of Amora becomes Areopolis, and Akko itself becomes Ptolemais. And in the Temple of Jerusalem, the signs that regulated admission to the Bet HaMikdash were written in Greek as well. And this brings us to the famous story of the translation of the Torah. When I was a young yeshiva bacher, the story of the translation of the 70 was told to us, and I don't know which story many of you have been exposed to, was that the King Ptolemy did not want the Jews to have this secret Torah for themselves. And he brought in 70 people, 70 different scholars, and put them in different rooms and had them translate it. And these scholars, according to the story that I heard, and many other people raised in Jewish day school or yeshivas heard, is that these rabbis knew, these scholars knew what to leave in and what to leave out, what to change, what not to change. And they ended up with identical copies. So, in fact, what most researchers believe is that the Jews of Alexandria themselves were losing their Hebrew, the way that American Jews lose their Hebrew, the way Canadians, I'm a Canadian, the way we lose and they learned they needed a translation. And in fact, this earliest Ptolemaic translation is a very, very accurate translation of the Torah, by the way. Okay, I've actually gone through it. I'm very interested in translations, and it was needed. It was necessary. And the Greek translation was used, became so used that people like Josephus and Philo considered the translation to be as valid as the Hebrew original. And this is a question I want to pose to all of you, by the way. As someone who's fascinated and really believes in the value of translation, and I actually believe that translations are possible. Many people say they're not. This question of, is the Torah written in English, is that still the Torah? And Muslims say the Quran written in any other language is not the Quran. It's a translation, but it's not the same thing. And this is it's a fascinating point to get into. So Jews, we didn't really talk too much about assimilation versus acculturation, but Jews kept intact aspects of their own culture while adapting different aspects of Greek culture. So Hellenized Jews, if you go to Israel, by the way, and you visit the ancient synagogues, you will see beautiful mosaics incorporating Greek gods, incorporating in the synagogues, incorporating the Greek zodiac. And for many modern day Jewish people who are raised in, I guess, in the ways that the majority are raised, this can be quite shocking. But in fact, they still maintain their Judaism. They still have the synagogue, they still have their Torah, they still have their arcs. But Hellenized Jews started saying that sons of Abraham had been companions of Hercules, and that sons of Isaac had sailed with Jason and the Argonauts. This is Black Figure, guys. You want to give me a date? If you said 560, you'd be pretty good. And these are Roman depictions. Later on, they identified Moses himself, Musaeus, the son of Orpheus, who wrote hymns. And Orpheus is also identified with King David for his beautiful playing with the lyre and the harp. And you get depictions like this in synagogues that we don't know if it's meant to be King David or Orpheus calming the wild animals with his beautiful music. And there's this kind of fusion and this synthesis. You have a depiction of Orpheus who goes to the end of the world and plays, because his wife Eurydice has died. He goes to the underworld and charms them with his beautiful playing, and they agree to let his wife accompany him back into the living on the condition he doesn't look back. And as he's leaving the underworld, he's overcome by the idea that a trick has been played on him. He looks back and she disappears. And of course, you have the story of Lot and his wife looking back. It's just, there's a lot of interesting overlaps. You have King David with his harp and the lion, which is Orpheus again, symbols of Orpheus. These are all. So my question to you is, is this adaptation and assimilation to Greek culture that we're looking at, is this what the Maccabees were resisting? And how did the Jews resist assimilation? After the story of Hanukkah that we're getting into, that we just passed, in which we apparently won against this fight against assimilation, what did we win, or did we win? And is it possible that, as some scholars try and assert, that it was actually a bunch of fundamentalist religious freaks that, kind of like the Taliban, that basically resisted against these open-minded Jewish thinkers and said, no, you can't have that. You can't have this kind of Greek thinking. We don't allow it. We think it's wrong. And they won and basically brought back the world the way the Taliban is bringing back their type of world, or was it something very, very different? This is an argument that scholars, Jewish scholars, are still debating until today. But there's no question about that the assimilation threatened traditional Jews. The reactions against Hellenism were complex, but other people, Near Eastern peoples, also rebelled. The only difference with the Maccabees is that they won. And my question is, what would have happened to us had we not had the Maccabean revolt? What would have happened to the Jews? Would we have become totally assimilated? We definitely would be very different than we are today. But what would have happened? One of the things that I included this is that there's actual known historical stories of Kohanim, of high priests engaging in wrestling matches in ancient Greece. So in other words, within Israel. So in other words, even the Kohanim, even the high priests were not only susceptible, but they also enjoyed aspects of Hellenism. And to continue the story, this theme, things changed in 175 when Antiochus decided he wanted to fight the Ptolemies in Egypt and create a unified kingdom. And so he accepts bribes from the Kohanim in Israel that want to replace the high priest with someone else. I love the fact that we have a coin of Antiochus himself. And 3 years later, another person named Mendelsohn, who wasn't even a Kohen, offered a higher bribe and appointed a high priest to the temple. So of course, this appointment for someone who's not even of the correct lineage was protested, and the Greeks and Antiochus implemented his appointment by force. I wanted to actually read this to you. I don't know why I can't move this down a bit. Maybe if I go like this, I can read it better. 1 second. Here. At that time, there were some evildoers. This is from the book of the Maccabees, by the way. At that time, there were some evildoers in Israel who tried to win popularity for a policy of integration with the surrounding nations. It was because the Jews had kept themselves aloof for so long, they claimed, that so many hardships had befallen them. They acquired a following and applied to Antiochus, who authorized them to introduce the Greek way of life. They built a Greek gymnasium in Jerusalem and even had themselves uncircumcised. And the first time I ever heard about that, I found that a very painful concept to consider. One moment, see if I can. And in other words, yes, you heard this correctly. As you know, the word gymnasium, means a place for the naked. Greek athletes trained in the nude, males, and Jews who were becoming increasingly assimilated wanted to compete in many of these Greek games. And so to pass themselves off as properly Greek, they actually would undergo an operation, a very painful operation. I'm not going to get into the details, but basically they found a way of making it look like they had a foreskin. And so that was considered, and this is something we know about. This is not something that was just made up to make us hate the Greeks more. So I remember when I had my professor who was first told the story. I found out later he was Jewish. He said he knew I was Jewish because when he explained about this little detail, he noticed I was the only one in the class that was wincing. So anyway, so here we have the story of course, Matisyahu, the way we've heard the story, killing the evil Jewish Hellenizer, and this engraving reflects our accepted version. Josephus, the information we get about Hanukkah, and why am I talking so much about Hanukkah? Because we just finished it. Occurs at 250 years after these events. And Josephus calls the occurrence as the Festival of Lights rather than the dedication, the Hanukkah. So in other words, in one sense, it's a military uprising and a freedom from tyranny. And only centuries later, after the Maccabees, you have the Talmud telling the story about the small vessel of oil that burned for 8 days. That's just something for you to know. So I thought it was funny. Well, how did Antiochus die? So according to the Maccabees, 1, the Jews cursed him with grief and worry. Answer 2, in the second book of the Maccabees, he was stoned, decapitated, and cut into pieces by Jews. And answer number 3, God gave him terrible diarrhea. So this is Josephus, the person who gives us the most information about this time period. And my question to you, to finish off this topic, is, was Hanukkah a successful revolt against the Greek tyranny? Was it a Jewish civil war pitting armed Hasmonean priests against urban Jews, priests and secular Jews who supported Greek reforms like the gymnasium and new rules for self-government? I'm not. So whatever the case might be, this victory ensured the establishment of the Hasmonean dynasty, and it created, this is the most important part I want to get into now, created an anti-Greek assimilation sensibility that wasn't changed until the 12th century Common Era, when Rambam, or Maimonides, published his Guide to the Perplexed in 1190. And this takes us now to Rambam, and in many ways brings us to the beginning of our series. So Rambam, or Maimonides, came into his rise to greatness in the so-called Golden Age. It was in many ways, the Golden Age of Islam was a period in which both Christians and Jews were allowed to attend the highest universities, the highest schools, and attain the highest positions possible within the society. And Rambam was a master of this of the different philosophies of his time. And so he, in this time period, because Islam was not oppressive in this time period, it allowed other people of the book to exist. He existed in a time in which Jews had no reason to keep the faith anymore unless they actually believed. And Rambam went into these so-called Hellenistic scriptures that were at that time written in Arabic, and we're going to get into how that happened and why, and brought these Greek rational thinking back into Judaism in his Guide to the Perplexed, and in many ways provided a type of rational Judaism, the same way as Islam at that time was a rational type of Islam that was palatable and acceptable, and allowed the thinkers of his own time period, other Jews, to say, we can accept this. This is something that makes sense, that resonates, and in many ways, and many fellow Jews of his time period were horrified by this. They saw it in many ways the way the Maccabees perceived the Hellenistic way of thinking. They actually burned Maimonides' first books. So this is the major question, the crux I wanted to get into. This is a depiction of a typical Islamic learning school. To become a doctor in Islam, in this so-called Golden Age, one had to master all of the philosophers, both Greek and Muslim, and it didn't matter if you were Jewish or Christian. In your final medical exams, you had to prove you were a scholar in these areas as well. And Maimonides was not only proved himself a scholar, Muslims consider him to be theirs, not even ours. They don't say he's a great Jewish thinker. For them, Maimonides is a great Muslim thinker, even though they know he was Jewish. That's something else for us to realize. So to complete this first lecture about looking into the Arab mirror to understand ourselves, this is really where it begins. We're going to look into this development of Islam, a very new religion. Muhammad was only born in 570 Common Era. He only had his revelations in 610. And so he was born in a time period when Greek philosophy and Greek thought was at its zenith and acceptable and available to everybody. He was also in a place where there were Jewish tribes and Jewish thinkers that, again, the romance of trade were available to him. And a lot of the stories that we're going to see in the Quran reflect both these types of knowledge, and Islam does as well. So I'm going to leave us with this final thought, this part 2 of the Hellenistic yo-yo. Sorry, I told you about the Greeks. And I'm going to close this very first lecture of the series with this point. It took us. We rejected the Greeks. We rejected Hellenism, and we won with this rejection. It took Rambam, vis-a-vis the Islamic Arabic way of understanding religion and philosophy, which is also, by the way, directly influenced by the Greeks, to bring this back to us. And the fact that we sat there and had this lecture today and had this discussion, and hopefully will become a discussion, not just a one-way talking head, is a result of this whole story. So I'll stop this at the moment. I'll stop the share.
Thank you. I was getting questions as to when are we getting to the topic, understanding Arab culture, understanding ourselves. So I guess we take responsibility for not advertising this particular program as best as we could. But what you did was you laid the framework for us to understand Arab culture. And again, this week on Thursday, we start our series in philosophy, I believe, or history and philosophy of Islam. And
Right.
I believe so. What you were saying, what you were showing us is this is the framework, this is the bedrock on which Muhammad comes on the scene, and Arab culture starts to evolve, and Islam starts to evolve, and it's really in relationship to everything you just taught us, right? Even though you put it in the context of Jewish stuff, what we're going to see now in our next lectures is going to be, is it going to be talking to the Greek culture? Is it going to be expanding on culture? Is it relating to it? Is it going off different direction?
The most important thing, even though for some of you this might have been a bit of a review, the most important thing, and the reason why I brought in the Jewish aspect, is to understand that this Greek culture arrived at most of the Western world through a very direct link. It arrived to our culture, to the Jewish culture, in a very different way. It arrived, was interrupted, and then came back again. And you cannot, and I think that most people that I meet, especially Jews raised in the Western world, assume that we got it in the exact same formula as everybody else. You cannot understand ourselves as Jews without understanding that it's a very different story. So we have a great point coming here, by the way. I want to touch on that. In some of the artworks I show, people had Asian features. That's right. So in other words, you have people who have been Hellenized depicting this what they perceive to be the known world as the Hellenistic world as themselves. And you're going to see depictions in my next few lectures of Muhammad, who supposedly wasn't depicted by Muslims, but in fact was, with Asian features, with Mongolian features, with Iranian features, and it's an incredible. It's actually a very beautiful human message, in some ways, that what we perceive to be this medium of knowledge that we receive, we put our own face on everything. But instead of the image of God, it's the image of us as we perceive. So thank you for that question and that point.
And so just a few basic questions, because we're out of time. We're in a stoppage. Is that what you call it in soccer? I learned a little bit from watching one game of FIFA. So how did you get interested in this whole area of learning? And why did you? I mean, you're fluent in Arabic. You read ancient languages. Like what? How did you get interested in all? You come from. I mean, you said you come from the world. You come from you and I have discussed this. You come from a Haredi background in Canada, so you come from a different world than almost anybody. I mean, I don't think Jane Lazaro was a Haredi person in her early. I just have that feeling. Nor Anita or Neil or Harrison Jan Schultz, although I've seen them with longer hair, but I just don't think that. So, how did you get from the Haredi world to this world of Greek theology, and particularly our topic for the month, Islam and the Arab world?
First of all, do we have enough time for this?
You have 2 minutes.
Right. So.
And then we go into penalty kicks. So
that's right. I'm not too good at that. But basically, my first language, I was raised by a father who was from Nashville, Tennessee, actually, but who was ultra Orthodox, I would say. And my first language in school, in nursery school and at the yeshiva, was Yiddish. But I spoke French and English because I was from Montreal. And when I decided at a very young age that I wasn't, I don't know what the word for this is. I didn't believe the way everyone else believed. So I went on strike basically until my father agreed to send me to a regular secular school where I was the only Jew, and I also had a yarmulke and peyot because that was the agreement I had with my father. So and then I ended up befriending. This is a crazy story. Because I was a wrestler at that time, and I was already, even with my peyot and yarmulke, I was already winning. I was the city champion, then I was the Canadian champion at the junior age. So the local Mohawk reservation people who were in my school liked me, and I spent a lot of time on the reserve because I had no more friends in the Jewish community, and the regular non-Jewish people didn't want to be friends with me. So I picked up Mohawk, and I started getting very interested in how language and culture are interrelated, because I had to learn to speak French and then understand how that culture interrelated. So when I moved, coming from French, being the Quebecois influence, when I moved to Israel, and my Arabic, for other reasons, my field of study, I became fluent in Arabic. When I ended up in Israel as a proud Jew, I did the army and I love Israel, but I ended up being fascinated by the Arab culture, because because we have 21% of our population is Arab, and they're slowly losing their Arabic, their ability to write, and even their words are becoming more and more. I would say there's a huge vocabulary that they've lost. So I started researching that, and I've become very interested in this whole question of how we ended up how we are, and what led to this. And that question has tantalized me forever. And I don't like making up theories. I like to really believe I'm getting close to the answers. So I'm trying to share with you some of the answers I found about how we got here and who we are today.
And I know this is like, I don't want to give away the whole story, but you talked about the influence of Hellenism on Judaism, how it came to us, and we're going to be focusing on Islam and the Arab culture and how it came to us. And I think the whole purpose of this 1 month is to show how much Arab culture has shaped who we are. And so, which one shaped us more, Hellenism or Arab culture?
I would say by far Arab culture, but Hellenism through Arab culture. Like in other words, Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, these Islamic philosophers who you're going to become familiar with throughout our lectures, were in love with Plato, we're in love with Aristotle, we're in love with many of the major pre-Socratic philosophers as well, and they Islamifized. They turned them into Islamic people. Basically, they actually have little explanations of why they were truly Muslim, and not in fact. But they incorporated many of their philosophies accurately, and with Islamic Arab flavor, and we incorporated that. That is the Hellenism and the Judaism that we have today, and it's directly through Rambam, I would say. So
if you have to outline what we'll be doing on our Thursday series, can you give us a quick?
We're gonna start with the question of Arabia before Muhammad. There was many Jewish tribes there, and they were fully Jewish. And from the stories you see in the Quran, that totally, unless you accept the Islamic story that he actually received his revelations, there's no question but that he had incredibly close relations with people who had very profound knowledge of the Torah, of the Talmud, of the different stories. You're going to hear stories that you thought were only in the Talmud or only in the Mishnah. So Muhammad was exposed to all of these, the Islamic ways, the philosophers, and he turned Arabia from a place of Christians, pagans, Jewish tribes into a unified empire, Islamic empire, that kind of took elements of all of it. And we, as Jews, thrived in these Islamic, different parts of the Islamic world, be it the Golden Age in Spain, Andalusia, or be it later on in the Ottoman Empire. We thrived, and we incorporated these aspects of Islam that we consider to be Greek, basically the philosophies and the rational thinking. And so that's the exploration we have to go through to really understand why we can even have this kind of conversation today.
Terrific. So I think we're out of time now, and it's very late for you. Are the programs a little earlier in the evening for you?
But
tell us about your Kivunim students. So here's a question about your Kivunim students. So is what you're teaching us what you teach your Kivunim students as well? Do they explore these issues? I mean, you said you went to Greece with them. Are you looking at these issues as well, or is it a different thing that you're teaching them or studying with them?
Well, they study, for instance, they're going to India. So they also study Buddhism, Hinduism. They actually meet the Dalai Lama, and hopefully they'll meet him again this year. They both study the art, architecture, and philosophy of the countries they go to. Then they learn the question of when Judaism enters this culture, what happens to it. So there are, of course, the Bnei Israel. There are many Jews of India, the Cochin Jews, many of them who are still there today. And they meet with them, and they talk with them, and they're fully Jewish and fully Indian. What does that mean? Same thing in Greece. So no, it's not the same thing, but there are elements that are the same. It's really looking for the right questions and trying to avoid the agenda of imposing another way of thinking. Basically, just saying, asking questions rather than giving emphatic answers. That's kind of the approach we take with Kivunim.
Okay, well, I think that's what we have time for today. As I mentioned to you, this is a deconstructed 1 month. So this is program 1. I think we only have 49 more to go, David, so don't worry.
Well, the next lecture, I'm not worried, I'm enjoying this. The next topic is going to be Jahiliyyah, the time before Islam in Arabia. And it's going to basically ask the question of how did a disparate a group of should I stop speaking? Or is it all?
No, you're going.
Okay, the question is how did a bunch of tribes that could not unite, even though they spoke the same language, within 100 years of Muhammad's message, create an empire that ruled from the Himalayas to the Rock of Gibraltar? Basically, it's how did that happen? And that's a powerful story. And the question of how empires develop, you'll see that's also one of the themes we're going to be exploring. But this is the beginning of the journey right now.
And this journey will take us from the origin story all the way to contemporary Israel.
Right.
This is not a story about the situation.
Wait till we get into mysticism. That's also an incredible because the Sufis we also come by mysticism through the Arab world as well.
So what you're saying is that Susan Glass has a lot of reading to do, and the Rubens should probably open up the Quran this weekend and read through in anticipation of other programs. And we've got.
If you like, I will give you recommended readings. I think they're.
I think people will enjoy. Cindy is looking there and she's saying yes. She wants her reading. Beth Brown wants reading. I think the point of this program, this point of this month, is to go deep in an area that people usually it's a topic that people think they know but they don't really, or to a topic they really don't know. I would say this is the most creative, unusual approach, the topic that we've done in years, and I want to thank you for making the suggestion. I want to thank Shirel for helping to coordinate this month of programming. So yes, anything you have to share would be terrific. And I also want to mention, I see Rosella there. So I wanted to thank Rosella Bernstein for everything she's done for CSP, for being on the CSP board for so many years. I want to tell Rosella that I'm thinking about Fred today, and I know he's with us. Fred always had perfect hair. I don't know how long he spent, Rosella, on his hair in the morning, but he had like a Ronald Reagan hair thing. I don't know what it was. I don't know where he stood with Ronald Reagan, whether he liked him or not. It's not a political statement. It was just the hair. And what's great about, as I mentioned, Rosella is 96, everybody. There she is, 96-year-old with CSP.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, I see David Wilner. I know you're catching up, David. I know that. But the point is that we have terrific learners and they like different topics. And Rosella was very excited about this particular topic when I mentioned it to her. So thank you, David, for the first lesson. Certainly a lot of things in there I didn't know about the Greek world, and so I appreciate the nuggets there. But I am really looking forward to learning more about Arab culture and Islam. We live in a world where Arab culture and Islam is not really portrayed in a positive light, and I know that this series will take us into a whole different level of learning and understanding, which will make a big difference for all of us who stay here for this Deconstructed month. So thank you, everybody. Be safe out there. We'll see you on Thursday. Right, Shirel? Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. East Coast time. We also have a special series coming up on Sunday regarding 4 historical events that you should know about with another past 1-month scholar. And I hope that you'll join us for that as well. So lots coming up in the month of January and February. With that, I think I'm going to have to go back to my day job. So thank you, everybody.
Okay.
See you on Thursday.
Bye for now.
Good night. How do we say good night in Arabic?
Masal al-khair. Tusbah al-khair.
Okay. Those of you in Orange County, when David does come for a week in July, I think we're going to study some Arabic. So
we definitely are. That's not maybe. We definitely are.
So Lisa Siegel should start working on it. You'll give us a primer, so we'll get the Arabic going. Okay.
I will give us an Arabic expression every class. I meant that. Every lecture.
Well, we started with Greek.
That's right.
You didn't give us Arabic. Promised. So I said good night will be our Arabic word for tonight. Okay. Know that for those of you who are still here, when I traveled around, when I traveled to Israel and I try to use my Hebrew, the Israelis always say, stop it, talk in English. But I've been to Morocco, but I've been to in Egypt and in Jordan. When I learned a few Arabic words, they would hold my hand. And they were so happy. I mean, I would probably bastardize their language, and God knows what I said. They were so happy that I even tried. And that's something that I remember to this day, how happy they were that I just knew a few words. Whereas when I go in Israel, they say, just talk in English, please. Yeah, that's the way it is. Okay, everybody. Take care. Rosella, nice to see you. Talk to you more soon. Bye, Louis Sherby and Chris Texier. Good to see you all. Bye.
Bye for now.